Now I will tell you about the story of a guy named Johann and the strange things he encountered. He lives alone, but someone is always staring back from the mirror. The story you're about to hear is not for the faint of heart, because the scariest thing isn't ghosts. It's when your reflection starts acting on its own. It all began with a bathroom mirror, harmless at first. But night after night, the reflection's gaze no longer matched my own. No one believed me, but mirrors don't lie. They simply reflect a truth we're not ready to face. Since moving into apartment 405 at the Few Men complex, Tuan felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had just come out of a long, dragging breakup nights, without sleep, rushed mornings with sunken eyes. But here he hoped would be a new beginning. The apartment wasn't large, just enough for one person. The living room connected to the kitchen with the bedroom and bathroom on the left. But there was one thing Tuan particularly liked, the bathroom mirror. A tall, full-length one with a polished metal frame that stretched all the way to the ceiling. He believed every single man should learn to look at himself each morning to check his hair shave, and most importantly, read his own expression. At first, everything was fine. The mirror was clean, the apartment quiet, and the cool night breeze from the 4th floor helped him sleep well. But then, the strange things began. Tuan noticed something odd in the mirror. Not always. Just sometimes when brushing his hair or washing his face in the morning, his reflection seemed slightly delayed. Just a second slower. A small part of his brain sounded the alarm, but he brushed it off. Must be my eyes playing tricks, he thought. One night he forgot to close the bathroom door after switching off the light. Lying in bed reading, he noticed the mirror still shimmered faintly. A soft glow like fog, though the bathroom was completely dry. He got up and went in. Nothing. No moisture, no light, no sound. But there was a faint streak on the mirror, like the mark of a palm sliding down the glass, distinct and fresh, as if someone had just pressed their cold, wet hand there. He wiped it away. The mark vanished. But as he turned to leave, a faint scraping sound echoed, like nails dragging across glass screech, only for a second. Tuan froze. His heart pounded, but reason told him it's nothing. Wind or maybe sounds from another floor. The following week, things escalated. One evening after a long day at work, he turned on the bathroom light. The sudden brightness made him squint, but when his vision cleared, he froze. In the mirror, he saw himself, but something was wrong. Tuan leaned down to wash his hands. The reflection leaned too, but when he looked up, his reflection remained bowed, 2 seconds slower. This time, Tuan yelled, "What the hell?" He stumbled back, but his reflection adjusted just in time to mimic the movement, as if it had quickly caught up to continue the performance. His heart raced. A chill crawled up his spine as if someone was watching him, not from behind, but from within the mirror. The truth no one believed. When he told coworkers, friends, they laughed. Old mirror, maybe the light angle's off. You're overthinking it. You just moved in. Probably exhausted mind playing tricks. No one believed him. But Tuan couldn't deny that each morning while washing his face, there were fleeting moments when the eyes in the mirror didn't match his. And that chill, sharp and cold ran down his back every time. He taped up the entire mirror, covered every corner with duct tape. That night he slept well, for the first time in nights. But in the morning, sunlight streamed into the bathroom, and the mirror was clear again. No tape, no marks. As if no one had ever touched it. Tuan began recording. He set up his phone facing the mirror. Lights off, lights on, adjusting the frame, trying to catch whatever it was. But the camera never captured what he saw with his own eyes. Whenever he felt it watching him, the video would still show a perfect reflection. No delay, no misaligned gaze. The final moment of this part. One early morning, Tuan awoke to a burning, tingling sensation in his palm, as if someone was holding his hand. From inside the mirror, he jumped up, ran into the bathroom. On the mirror, clearly drawn by a wet finger. A line of faint writing appeared. I used to be you too. Chapter 2. Days of Madness. Tuan could no longer sleep. The words "I used to be you too" echoed in his mind like a voice at the bottom of a well. The more he tried to forget, the louder it returned. He had taken a photo of that message. But the next morning, all that remained was a spotless mirror. No words, no handprints, not even a speck of dust. Tuan tried everything. A different phone, a digital camera, night recordings, flash. But no device could capture the strange things in the mirror, not even the sentence burned into his memory. Only he could see them. Chapter 3. The room that wasn't his. One evening while washing his face, Tuan noticed something strange. The floor tiles reflected in the mirror did not match the ones beneath his feet. He bent down to examine more closely. The tiles in his bathroom were cream white with marble-like patterns. But in the mirror, they were dull gray, moldy, speckled with black patches like mildew. He reached out to touch the mirror. Cold glass. But the closer he pressed his palm, the more he felt a faint warmth, as if it came from inside. Is someone living in there? The thought flashed in his mind. He immediately stepped back, but he couldn't deny it. Inside the mirror was a room nearly identical to his own, just with subtle differences. The reflected light bulb in the mirror was working, but in his room, that bulb had long been dead. A small blue plastic chair stood near the sink. He owned no such chair. And most disturbing of all, his reflection was still there, still standing, but not walking away. Tuan stepped out of the bathroom, but the man in the mirror didn't follow. He remained motionless, head slightly bowed, one hand raised as if trying to touch the glass from the other side. Chapter 4. The one who looked like him. Tuan began sealing off the mirror every night, covering it completely with black fabric and tying all four corners. But each morning, the cloth lay neatly on the floor, not crumpled, as if someone had gently removed it. One night he dreamed. He entered his familiar bathroom, but the mirror was gone. In its place was a black pit, deep, endless. He knelt down and stared into it. From the bottom, a man identical to him looked up, but his eyes were empty, hollow. His body was slowly being consumed by thick, dark tiles, layer after layer like oozing mud. He managed to say only, "Don't let me go, you don't understand." Tuan jolted awake, gasping. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it might break free from his chest. His pillow was soaked in sweat. The room was pitch black. The wall clock had stopped ticking. Only one light remained, the bathroom light glowing faintly, and the mirror had turned on by itself. Chapter 5. That's not me anymore. Tuan no longer felt safe looking into mirrors. He avoided them completely, even using a small pocket mirror to shave. One day, while trimming his nails with scissors, his eyes wandered just briefly to the mirror. His reflection was staring straight at him. No eye contact, no blinking. And the most horrifying part, the Tuan in the mirror wasn't holding scissors. He was holding a shard of broken glass. Chapter 6, 405. Wasn't the first one sleepless night, Tuan went down to the reception desk and casually asked about the history of apartment 405. The clerk replied, the last tenant was also a single man, named Koa, worked in IT, quiet type. But what? He disappeared, just stopped showing up to work, stopped paying rent, left everything behind. When we checked the room, there was no body, just one strange thing. The receptionist leaned in, lowered his voice. The bathroom mirror, it was completely covered with black fabric, but no one could remove it. Anyone who touched it felt this cold jolt, like a static shock. Then one day, it just fell off, exactly like it did now. Tuan was speechless. That man, Koa, vanished, and before disappearing, he too was haunted by the mirror. Tuan asked around, more digging through old management records. No official notes mentioned anything odd, but in a maintenance logbook written in faded red ink was a single entry 405, Time-shifted mirror. Cannot be replaced, cannot be moved. Does not reflect correctly. Chapter 7. Time-shifted who's on the other side. Tuan began keeping a journal not to prove anything anymore, but to remind himself of who he was. He feared that one day his mind would be slowly replaced by someone else on the other side. Day 15. I woke up freshly shaved. I don't remember doing it. Day 16. My phone shows the camera app was opened at 3:12 a.m. I went to bed at 11. Day 17. I saw myself in the mirror, smiling. But I was not smiling. Chapter 8. The call from within. That night, his phone rang. Unknown number, no caller ID. Just one line on the screen, 405, calling, as if the apartment itself was calling him. He picked up, no voice, only breathing, heavy, distorted breathing mixed with the high-pitched screech of nails dragging across glass. Tuan held his breath. Then came a fragmented whisper, weary, broken. If you're still you, then leave this place. Who is this? Not someone. What's left after the reflection? The mirror doesn't reflect the truth. It stores souls. Tuan dropped the phone. Chapter 9. On the other side, a different life. The final night before Tuan left the apartment, he turned on the bathroom light. The mirror lit up like daylight, though no bulb in the room was working. In the mirror, he saw a room identical to his own, but someone was living in it, making breakfast, putting on shoes, straightening a tie. That someone was Tuan, but with a different energy, more alert, more organized, and calmer. Tuan slammed his palm against the mirror. The man inside looked up. For the first time, their eyes met perfectly, and the Tuan in the mirror smiled. Thank you for holding the place. Now I can live on. You should rest. Then the mirrored Tuan turned away, walked out of frame, and closed the door behind him. On Tuan's side, the mirror no longer reflected anything, just a solid ink-black surface. The next morning, apartment 405 was found empty. No belongings, no trace. Only one thing remained on the bathroom floor, a handwritten note. A mirror only reflects what we forgot once existed. Chapter 10. I left, but it wasn't me who left. Tuan left apartment 405 the next morning. He didn't run, but he didn't walk either. He simply left, quietly, like stepping out of a room mid-conversation with a ghost. He moved into the spare room of his college friend Nam's place. Someone who knew him, trusted him, someone real. Tuan recounted everything. The mismatched gaze in the mirror, the foggy fingerprints, the message written on the glass, I used to be you. He even told Nam about the final night, seeing himself in the mirror alive, cooking, smiling, and moving on without him. Nam didn't laugh. He didn't roll his eyes. He just stared. Okay, Nam said, let's assume that mirror really does store something, like a soul, maybe even a self. Then the question is, Nam's voice lowered, if you got out, who or what is living inside your old skin? Chapter 11. Someone is wearing my face. 3 days passed. Then Tuan's phone buzzed. You left your coat here. Should I bring it over? There was no name, but the way the message was written, the phrasing, the tone, it was exactly how Tuan used to text him. His ex, the one who blocked him 2 months ago. He stared at the screen, trying wrong number. What? It's you, Tuan. You were just at the apartment last night. You cooked dinner. You said you wanted to start over. Tuan dropped the phone. He hadn't returned to the apartment, but someone who looked like him had. He called Nam. You still have the keys to 405? Yeah, you gave them to me. No one's been in since. Why? Tuan exhaled, sharp and shallow. We're going back. Chapter 12. Return to 405 when the reflection walks freely. They returned at noon. Sunlight poured through the dusty lobby, but when they opened 405, the air was warm, too warm. A steaming hot dinner was on the table, Trang's favorite dishes, still fresh. The apartment was pristine, untouched, but lived in. Tuan's hands trembled as he walked into the bathroom. The mirror was there, but there was no reflection. Not dim, not distorted, just black, like someone had painted over the glass with liquid shadow. Nam raised his phone to record. Camera failed to open. System error. Camera unavailable. Tuan screamed into the darkness. "Who are you? Give me back my life." The mirror pulsed just once. Then, a face pressed against the black glass from the inside. It was him. Same nose, same scar under the left eye, but the eyes were entirely black. No whites, no soul. And the thing smiled. "You left. You didn't want to stay. You made space. And now I get to live." Chapter 13. The Loop, a reality that repeats. After that, Tuan started noticing things. Every mirror at the gym and cafes, even bathroom windows, stopped reflecting him. Instead, he saw static, flickers, a lag like buffering. Worse, his phone started taking photos by itself. No app open, just click. And in the photo, he was smiling, always smiling. Even when his lips were stone cold, frozen in fear, Nam grew more worried. He did some digging and found something disturbing. Over the last 5 years, every 18 months, a single male tenant, living alone in apartment 405, vanished. No trace, no belongings, no evidence of death or departure. But in each internal maintenance report, bathroom mirror intact. No dust, no fingerprints, impossible to remove. One night, Tuan recorded an audio journal. "I don't know if I'm still me. There are moments where I look at my hands and I can't tell if they belong to me anymore. I think it's not the mirror that's the problem. I think it's what comes through it when no one's watching." Chapter 14. Not my voice, not my eyes. Tuan's voice began to shift. Nam noticed it first in a joking tone. "That doesn't sound like you," he said. Then came the eyes. They stayed open longer, blinked less, started avoiding sunlight. Tuan began muttering to himself in the bathroom. Not words, just mirror speak, throat deep whispering, as if responding to something only he could hear. He started keeping notes in his own handwriting, but when he read them back, "These aren't my thoughts." One morning, Nam found him standing in front of the bathroom mirror, perfectly still for over an hour. The lights were off. The mirror was dark. Nam pulled him away. Tuan turned, smiled, but his teeth looked like they'd been filed down. Chapter 15. You're the reflection now. Nam set up a night camera, an old camcorder with analog film, not digital. No bugs, no interference. What he caught on tape. At 3:12 a.m., Tuan stood up from bed, walked to the mirror, and stepped through it. Not metaphorically, literally. His body leaned forward, his face pressed into the glass, and his whole form slid through, vanishing without a ripple. At 3:23 a.m., Tuan walked back into frame. Same clothes, same face, but his movements were smoother, too smooth, as if he was adjusting to the skin. Nam asked him, trembling, "Where did you go?" Tuan smiled, just smiled. Then word for word, voice slightly off pitch, he said, "You don't have to worry anymore. He's resting now." He was tired. Nam left the apartment that night, but when he looked in the rearview mirror of his car, Tuan was sitting in the back seat. Chapter 16. The final entry. This was found on Nam's phone weeks later. The file had no timestamp and no metadata. It simply opened, played, then deleted itself. If you're hearing this, you're already too close. Don't trust your reflection. Don't trust what it shows you. The mirror in apartment 405 doesn't reflect light. It reflects choices. Regrets, weakness. It watches, it waits, and when you blink, it decides. If you ever see your reflection, blink after you do, run. Epilogue, the new tenant. The building has since been renovated. Apartment 405 is now listed as 407. The mirror is still there. It's never been removed. The current tenant is a young woman recently moved in. She says it's peaceful mostly, but sometimes she hears things at night from the bathroom. A dripping sound, a tapping. And once, just once, she swears she saw something written on the fogged-up mirror after a hot shower. She wiped it away quickly, but the letter